Hello and welcome back. Today's lecture is going to be a continuation of 19th century reform movement. And today we're going to focus on women's reform. The reality is the women's reform movement, women's rights movement really has been around as long as America. You know, Abigail Adams was advocating for equal treatment of women when John Adams was trying to found America. And so, this has been it's going to be a very long process for women. It's going to be a slow process for women. And we'll talk about part of the reason why that is, because not all women are convinced that they should have the same types of jobs as men and the same political rights as men. And we'll talk about why. So, when we're talking about women's reform, the first thing that you have to understand is that the majority of people in America, both women and men, believed in this idea that is referred to as the cult of domesticity. Or also known as the cult of true womanhood. And it's the idea that a woman's place was in the home. It's her job to cook and clean. She was in charge of the health care of the family. She's supposed to take care of children and early education, right? She's not going to be able to take care of college education because they're not women aren't being educated. Most women aren't being educated that much, and if they are, it's not in math and science. It's in poetry and manners, and that women are in charge of morals and religion. The belief is that women are the examples of good moral behavior in society. That men, on the other hand, are kind of these big dumb animals that women help to domesticate and make moral creatures. Now, for a lot of you guys, because you're hearing this with 21st century morality, and you think, oh, that's oppression, that's this, it's an oppressive thing, and it's definitely more complicated than that. For most people, the idea of the cult of domesticity isn't about oppressive men oppressing women. It really is about a division of labor. And so, you have to understand the time period. The time period is much different than it is today. For most of human history, life was very, very, very difficult. Just the simple task of getting food, like we have today, just going to the grocery store, just didn't exist. And so, for most of human history, the it took all day to either go out and hunt food and kill it and bring it back home, which is incredibly dangerous, or it took all day to be out farming food and growing food. And so men, because they are generally bigger and stronger, are going to be tasked with doing that. And it took all day to do that. But then you still have other needs. You still need to have your food cooked. You still need to have your home taken care of. You still need to have, children being raised and taken care of. And so if the men are out all day, taking care of one set of tasks because they are just physically better for doing it, women, on the other hand, were placed in charge of the home because those things needed to get done too. And they took all day to do it, right? I mean, when you're living in a world without a dishwasher, without a vacuum cleaner, without washing machines, I mean, just doing clothes, you have to walk down to the river and wash them in the river, and it took all day to dry them. And you don't have a microwave or an oven and you're cooking over fire. It just takes all day to do it. So somebody had to do that all day, and more importantly, somebody had to take care of children. And women are just genetically better able to do that, right? Men can't feed babies, biologically. And so the division of labor, the cult of domesticity, stems out of that division of labor. Now, once we get to the 1800s, the cult of domesticity is starting not to make as much sense, right? Once we get into a world where we start to have more modern kind of appliances, and by the time definitely we get to the 1920s, the cult of domesticity just won't make sense much at all, because you'll have washing machines and dishwashers, and the home tasks won't take as much time. So it makes sense that people can women in particular can step out and get an education and do those things. Once we get to baby formula and those kind of things, then we don't have to divide the labor the way that we had historically divided the labor. And so most people, and it's really hard for us today to wrap our minds around, but most people in the 1800s, saw this division of labor as not as oppressive, but as natural and as necessary and as a partnership. Whereas today, because it's not necessary, it's generally viewed as not being a partnership. It's viewed as being oppressive, and so and neither one of those two points is wrong. I'd argue that actually both of them are right. Thinking of it as oppressive today is probably correct, and thinking of it as not oppressive back then is also probably correct. Well, how can that be true? Well, because the context is different, the times are different, the technology is different. So most people believe in this back then. They believe that it's a man's job to go out into that to the world and provide, and then it's a woman's job to stay home and take care of that. Now, like I said, by the time we're getting 1800s, that's not making as much sense anymore because we're not out hunting. There's lots of people that aren't out farming, and it's evolved to not just mean that. It also has evolved to mean that women shouldn't be public figures. They shouldn't be in politics. And see, this is the part where it starts to get to become unreasonable. Women are, as far as politics go, they're supposed to defer to their husbands or fathers. Different states have at this point different rules regarding women in politics, but for the most part, women are being excluded from politics. They're not going to have the national right to vote until 1920, and so in general, women were to just defer to their husbands. They were to be seen and not heard. They were supposed to defer to their husbands with business and finance. Women were in charge of, the buying the groceries and doing all that, but it was the husband that was the one that was in charge of determining how much money was available for that and, all the business stuff. And like I said, most women agree with this. Not all women, clearly. There are no monolithic groups out there, right? And so there's always outliers and there's always people who disagree. But for the most part, women will believe in the cult of domesticity. In reality, most women are going to believe in this type of division of labor really up through World War II. And even after World War II, although we'll start to see substantial changes after World War II. So these changes, changing roles, and movement away from the cult of domesticity is going to be a slow process. But like I said, it really kind of starts with in the 1800s with westward expansion and moving out to the frontier. A lot of the women that move out to the frontier, they have to set aside the cult of domesticity that says women are all about staying at home and being pretty and, taking care of the family. Well, if you're traveling with your family out west, you can't do that, right? I mean, you have to help your husband build the home. Well, that's getting your hands dirty. That's physical labor. That's not cult of domesticity. So we'll start to see a movement away from it with people heading out west. We'll also see a movement away from the cult of domesticity with poor Northerners. Poor Northerners, if the husband isn't making enough to pay for the roof over your head and the food on your table, a lot of those Northern women are going to be forced to go into work. And a lot of them will get jobs in textile mills and places like that, which again, that's stepping outside of the home. And so, this is very important. And we think of this as kind of a small thing, but it's not small, right? When the woman moves out west and she has to pick up, cow manure and dry it out for fuel, and she gets her hands dirty and helps build the home or gardens in the backyard, or chops down the tree for firewood. All those things, she's been told she can't do that her entire life. And so once you you accomplish those things, you then raise children that are going to, you're going to tell your kids the story of like, oh yeah, I helped dad build this house. And, you're going to raise your daughters to believe they're more capable than what you believed to be capable. And so it slowly builds. And it's the same with women that work in the northern cities. It's, they've been told their entire lives, women can't do it, women can't do it. As a matter of fact, all the way up until World War II, some women believe that if they, do a man's job, they'll actually turn into a man or become a lesbian, which I know today we hear that and we're like, what? But there are people that believe that. And so, when mom gets a job in a factory and the daughter sees that, it's going to be very difficult to tell that daughter that she's not capable of doing it. Now she might not want to have to do it, and a lot of them won't want to, right? They're still going to believe I should get married and have kids and that's what I should do, but it's going to be much more difficult to tell them that they can't, and that's going to be an important step. Most women won't believe that until we get a significant number of women into the workforce, and that's going to be World War II. So we're still, we're still 100 years away from that happening. So, Catherine Beecher, the daughter of Lyman Beecher, we talked about Lyman Beecher earlier with Oberlin College, and really being this true believer in reform and using Oberlin College for a stop on the Underground Railroad. Hopefully, you remember that from previous lectures. Well, his daughter, and this is back to my point that your kids will see what you do and be forever changed by that, because Lyman Beecher was Oberlin College that accepted women and let women into that university system. Catherine Beecher's raised in an environment where she's told that women are more capable than they had believed, and so she'll push for education for women. Now I want to be careful here. Catherine Beecher is still a believer in the cult of domesticity. She is. She's not advocating necessarily that women go out and get degrees in math and science. That's not where she's at. She is pushing for a more well-rounded education, and is going to push for women to be teachers because that makes sense. That's a part of the cult of domesticity. It's it's a belief that women raise children. School teachers help to raise children, so that's kind of a natural fit for them to be able to do that. They need to have a more well-rounded education, but she's still going to be a believer that most of these jobs are out there, factory jobs, things like that, aren't right for women. So, again, and this is the story of the women's rights movement. Really, it's this slow progress, and it is going to be. I mean, because we're going to talk about this in multiple lectures. It is just sometimes it just seems painfully slow, but slow is still at least progress. And so, Catherine Beecher also says that women should be involved in teaching because, again, in the belief of cult of domesticity, women are the moral fiber of the country. And so, if you're going to have people teaching your kids, don't you want them to be, women, because women are moral? So, like I said, this change is going to be very, very slow. Most women, particularly middle class and upper class women, are going to be full on believers of the cult of domesticity. But slowly, and mostly through religion, what we're going to see is that women are going to start to step out and get involved in politics. We already kind of talked about how they stepped out into work with, poor women, women out west, and teachers. But to get involved in politics, what happens is, women are really in charge of making sure everybody goes to church. And so women are a crucial part of the Protestant church organizations in America. And because they're a big part of that organization, when they're at church, a lot of times they're talking about, sin and problems of society and things like that. And there's certain things that keep popping up over and over again in those conversations. And the first issue that comes up a lot is the temperance movement. temperance. You remember from previous lectures, temperance is about controlling the consumption of alcohol, right? Limiting alcoholism in America. This affects women dramatically. If you believe in the cult of domesticity and women in charge of the home, having a drunk man at home is definitely going to affect what's going on at home and primarily the children. And so the belief is that these drunk husbands are the ones spending all the money at the bar, the saloon, almost said salon, the saloon, and they're spending all their money there, which means there's not enough money for food, healthcare, or whatnot. There's also the belief that these drunk husbands are losing their job, and then there's no money, and the entire family's destitute. So it's two ways it affects the home. And then the third way is domestic abuse. And so, men, and it's not that alcohol makes men, violent, but it makes violent men more violent more often. And so, all for those three reasons, women believe to protect the home, they have to get involved in politics to push the temperance movement to protect the home. So it's this like reluctant involvement in politics. And so women really kind of step up. They're going to be the ones that are going to, there'll be protests out in the street. We're going to see prayer groups surrounding the local bars, trying to get guilt men into, not drinking. And there's really going to be a political push to end alcohol. And so again, if the cult of domesticity says women should not be involved in politics, right? And women can't be, they're like physically not capable of doing it as well as a man. When they step out of that and they actually get involved in the temperance movement and they actually get the 18th Amendment passed that prohibits alcohol, all of a sudden now you can't really tell an entire group of people that they're not capable of doing something that they did. So it's very important that, for women in the political process to have some experience in the temperance movement. They will then also use those same groups that they formed in church and in the temperance movement to start to advocate for the abolition of slavery. Now, this is going to be controversial because it's going to cause a split in the women's movement. There are going to be some women that are very focused on getting women equal rights in the United States for women. There are other women that are looking at the United States and saying, look, there's several big problems we have to deal with. Probably the two most pressing are, equal rights for women and ending slavery. And those women look at those two problems and they say one's worse than the other. And slavery is worse than women not having the right to vote. And so part of the movement will split off and say, you know what? We don't need to focus on getting women the right to vote. What we should do is we should focus on all of our attention on ending slavery. And once we do that, then we'll try and get women the right to vote. And that's essentially what happens. Women will kind of put their own self-interest on the back burner to focus on abolition before they start to focus, completely on getting women the right to vote. Harriet Beecher Stowe is one of these famous women that are going to be a part of the abolitionist movement. We've been talking about the Beecher family a lot. This is another daughter of Lyman Beecher. She's the one that writes Uncle Tom's Cabin. It's a fictional account of a couple of slaves in the South that really exposes the evil of slavery. It's a seminal work. It's one of the most important books ever written by an American author because it's going to really expose Northerners that have no idea about slavery, that are just kind of indifferent about slavery. It's going to expose them to the evils of slavery, which is going to put political pressure to actually end slavery. And so it's it's super important. And Abraham Lincoln talks about it as being one of the most important books that is going to get written. There are people that make arguments, historians that make arguments that you don't have the Civil War without the writing of Uncle Tom's Cabin. I think that might be going a little too far. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty certain that's going too far. But it's just to show you how important that book actually is. So, two of the most important women's rights advocates are going to be Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Lucretia Mott is a Quaker and an abolitionist, and is adamantly opposed to slavery. She, as a matter of fact, started a nationwide movement to boycott the products of slavery, which, I mean, that's pretty difficult because you're boycotting cotton, and for a woman who, a lot of their clothes are made out of cotton, that becomes very difficult. So she, it's kind of diehard abolitionist and women's rights advocate. And then Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who is highly educated, is a lawyer. Her husband is she studied law, I should say. Her husband is an abolitionist lawyer. These two women are going to be absolutely critical to kind of defining the movement and setting goals for the women's rights movement. And it all really started because of abolitionism. Both of these ladies, passionate abolitionists, and they save up a bunch of money and they head to London for a conference, an abolitionist conference to end slavery. And when they get there thinking, they're excited to get started in this process, they're not let in the conference because they're women. And it's like, blows their mind, right? They're like, what are you talking about? Like, we want to end slavery. You need all the help you can get. Like, we're here to help. And they were denied, and it was a real eye opener for them. And they realized, like, wow, we're really second-class citizens too. We need to do this. And they decided that then and there that they want a convention to discuss women's rights. Again, part of that too is, still there's this belief in there's still the remnants of cult of domesticity, even in people that kind of reject the stay-at-home nature of it. The belief that, man, we need to, for abolitionists' sake, we need to include women into the political process because they're the standard bearers of morality. Now, what we're going to find is, and we see this in the 1920s, that women don't change politics. They don't make it any more moral. They don't make it any less moral. The reality is they're not any more likely to be moral than a man is, or immoral than a man is. But there's still kind of that belief. So Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton decide to set up their own, women's rights convention at Seneca Falls at Elizabeth Cady Stanton's home. And so they're going to pull together leaders from all across the country. And this is why it's important, because it doesn't really accomplish anything. It sets some goals, and one of those goals will get them ridiculed. We'll talk about what that is here in a second. But what it does is it organizes the community and kind of steers the community in one direction. And so it's the first women's rights convention in the United States. They're going to create a list of kind of demands or ideals. That's their declaration of sentiments. There's 12 different resolutions for legal and political rights, including, what they believe to be a very important one, which is easier access to divorce. And this is, today, a lot of times we think like, what? Divorce rates are super high. I thought we were supposed to be trying to limit the amount of divorces. Well, again, context different. In the 1800s, divorce was set up in such a way that it really limited women's ability to escape bad situations. We talked in previous lectures in the Jackson unit, where we talked about Rachel Jackson and how she wasn't able to get a divorce for her husband, even though her husband abandoned her, because she had to have his permission to get a divorce. Well, this is bad for women, because if you're stuck in an abusive relationship, or a relationship with an alcoholic, or somebody who can't keep a job, or somebody who's abandoned you, you can't get divorced and get remarried and have that financial stability. Remember, in a world where they're telling women they can't work, it's survival. For survival's sake, they have to be attached to a man. And so if they're attached to a bad man, and the law says that they need that man's permission to get a divorce to separate before they can get with another man, that's life ruining. And so one of the things that they're going to be demanding is more liberal divorce laws, an easier way to get a divorce. But That's not the most controversial thing. The most controversial sentiment is the ninth resolution, which actually called for women's suffrage or women's right to vote. That's really radical at the time. It's really controversial. Most women's rights advocates are just asking for more property rights, like out west. A lot of times, like if a husband and wife are married and they have kids, if the husband dies, if the son inherits the property and not the wife. And so there's all kinds of there's all kinds of examples where the son like kicks the mom out and like she's just destitute, right? And so there's property rights issues, there's divorce rights issues. In some areas there's the rule of thumb that it's legal to beat your wife as long as you don't do it with an instrument any wider than your thumb. There's no rules for marital rape, and so there's all kinds of like issues that these women rights people are supporting. But the one that's really going to just cause the air to get sucked out of the room is to give women the right to vote. Most people just don't think that the country is ready for that, including Larisha Mott. It not necessarily that wasn't the end game goal, but the fear was that if you ask for something so radical and upset the power structure, before people are ready, that people just won't take you seriously. And so this is very controversial. It's not going to happen, until 1920. So it's going to take a very long time to actually see it through. But it is important because it's putting it out there. It's saying that there are people that believe that women should have the right to vote, even though in some states, particularly out west, women already do have the right to vote. She's advocating for full political equality for women. Which, by the way, when I say it's controversial, it's not just men. There are a lot of women that believe that as well. So, Seneca Falls doesn't get any immediate results. It's largely ignored. It's not this great important thing that we think of it today as, but it is still important. Because it is going to organize the community and it is going to kind of set the standards and the goals for what the movement wants to achieve. So that organization is going to be very important in the temperance movement. It's going to be very important in the abolitionist movement, and it's going to be important for the gradual progress made during the women's movement. One of the things that's going to come out of this is there is going to be kind of this belief that women should have more access to education. A lot of middle class and more wealthy families have been educating their daughters for a while. And so more and more women are starting to get an education. Now, again, a lot of times that education is like, poetry and literature and manners and things like that. But it is a foot in the door, right? And so they're really training to be good wives. But it is a foot in the door. And some women are going to start to get into the sciences and and medicine. And one of those women is going to be Elizabeth Blackwell. Elizabeth Blackwell has this really great story. She's a teacher in the United States, and she has this friend, and this friend, a female friend, and this female friend is having health issues. But all the doctors in America are men, right? They're all men. And so, the cult of domesticity is really strict about, a woman's places in the home, and that, a woman is to be modest, and, and that's what they're telling, that is what women have grown up believing that they have to be a good person. And so the modesty issue, it becomes a problem here because Elizabeth Blackwell's friend doesn't want to go to the doctor because she doesn't want to have to disrobe in front of somebody who's not her husband, in front of a man who's not her husband. So she puts it off and she puts it off and she puts it off, and then she dies. She doesn't get the medical treatment that she wants because she's too ashamed to go to a medical doctor. And Elizabeth Blackwell goes, well, ain't that crap? And so what she decides is if women are going to feel that way, right? And you can't change how other people feel, right? And so Elizabeth Blackwell's logic is, well, if my friend feels that way, other women feel that way, and they're denying themselves medical care because they can't see a woman doctor. We need women doctors. And so she's going to apply to the Geneva School of Medicine. And the Geneva School of Medicine actually decides to let her in, and they let her in because they want to prove a point. They believe that women aren't capable of becoming doctors. And so they let her in specifically because they expect her to fail and they want to just show the world, like, look, we tried. Women say they're capable of this, but she flunked out. We told you they're not, yada, 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 blah, blah, blah. Well, it doesn't work out that way. Elizabeth Blackwell, by the end of her first year, after being taunted and harassed by a lot of the male medical students laughing at her and whatnot, by the end of her first year, the men are coming to her to be tutored. She's top of her class. And so she will graduate from medical school, and she'll be the first American woman to earn a medical degree. And so it's one of those like kind of moments, like, you thought you let me in to make me look bad, but I showed you. And so, all of a sudden now, again, every time we have one of these small little victories here, it just kind of proves that the cult of domesticity is no longer relevant. That women are capable of doing these same jobs that were believed to only be male professions. And so Elizabeth Blackwell kind of shatters that. As a matter of fact, today I just read an article recently. Women dominate the medical field. There's more female doctors, I believe, in the United States than male doctors. And so congratulations, Elizabeth Blackwell. You started a trend that is still going strong today. There are African American women in the movement, but let's be honest. If the white women in the movement, if a lot of the white women in the movement are thinking, "Hey, you know what? I think slavery is the more important issue to focus on instead of women's rights," African American women are going to definitely think that. And so most African American women are more focused on abolition. Isabella Bumfrey or Sojourner Truth, whatever you want to call her, she did advocate for women's rights. She was a strong advocate for women's rights. She felt that you could do both. And so she's probably the greatest example at this point. All right, that concludes our lecture for today. Thank you very much. I will see you again shortly.